Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is our very first in a series of cultural conversations, and it's the first time that I've done this, but we've had some practice, so there shouldn't be any issues. I'm Peter Tierfeld. I'm the advancement consultant at St. Mary's Music School. Before I hand over to our host, Keith Bruce from VoxCarnyx, I have just a little bit of housekeeping. Could you please keep your microphones muted so that we can focus on our guests? We will have the opportunity for a few questions at the end of the conversation. If you have a question, could you please put it into the chat box and I will pick that up, and following the conversation, I'll come back on to ask those questions. Thank you, and now over to Keith.
And good afternoon to you all. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Keith Bruce. I'm co-founder of VoxCarnyx, which is a new classical music and opera website that myself and Ken Walton of the Scotsman have started, and we're delighted to be able to join St Mary's and the Royal High School Preservation Trust in this series of cultural conversations exploring the plans for the Royal High School. And this month, I'm joined by William Gray Muir from the Royal High School Preservation Trust and Carol Nimmo of the Perfect Harmony Development Board. Having introduced myself, I think William Gray Muir's role in this is quite clear. However, I hope Carol won't mind if I ask her to kick things off by explaining her own involvement and telling us all about the formation of the Perfect Harmony Development Board.
Yeah, I mean, I am a resident on the terraces, and of course, One Regent Terrace is absolute next door neighbour to the school. So from the very start, we have been interested in all developments. In fact, as a residents group, the Residents Association of the Terraces, we were aware of the Duddingston House Property Hotel development plan since 2009. And at our AGMs, we always would look at developments round and about in the area, and we kept saying, oh, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. And then suddenly in 2014, two of us were invited to the high school to be shown around the school, which was a great privilege, and then the first plans. So we're going back some, and they were awful, and very few people saw them. They weren't what even became the first planning application. So we were on high alert from that point. And I have to say the residents and the terraces, you know, I would say almost unanimously are hugely supportive of this proposal and have been from the start. So we were objecting like crazy to the first proposal. And then it rolled on. And then fortunately we got on 18th of December 2015, we managed to have the first hotel proposal defeated by one vote. It was such a scary day. And that's how close it was. And then fortunately we had the Preservation Trust plan, and that was unanimously accepted. And then we had the second proposal. So now we're rolling on, we're in 2017, and there's the start of a campaign, literally, to sort of raise awareness of the whole project. And as the second hotel proposal moved through the planning process. And that became the Perfect Harmony campaign. And I don't know if there is a picture there on the screen, because this was a t-shirt campaign. It was to raise public awareness. And there is somewhere a picture of a motley crew of residents outside the school wearing our t-shirts. And, you know, I think it actually hit the press. So there we were, very keen. And I was chair of the Residents Association, so I was sort of taking the photo, I think, badly. And then the kids from the school were also involved, and there they are. They're actually doing something very useful and lovely. And it was a good campaign. It worked well. We sent out a couple of leaflets as much as we could. You know, we did a drop, and that it sort of really took off. It began to really grow legs then. I mean, by this time we had thousands of letters of objection and support either way as we went through, depending on the planning application that was going on. And then I suppose we realized that all of us realized the three parts, you know, the school, us as a sort of little campaign group, if you like, and the Preservation Trust, I mean, everything was magnifying hugely. And what we couldn't have was either of those parties having to look at the sort of route forward for the middle ground, so to speak. The school had to develop their school for the project. The Preservation Trust had to develop the building for the project. So we became that sort of link in the middle. And I have used the analogy before that I feel that the Perfect Harmony Development Board became the zip that brought the project together. And in fact, I mean, I think that quote is in our newsletter, but the more I think about it, you know, all the time we're linking up with this zip because there's just so much happening and so much needing pulled into it. So we grew from a little campaign group into a development group. And that's really where we got started.
Thank you. Thank you. But perhaps just to recap a little, William, if you could say a little about the history of the trust and where that began and how it slotted into the formation of the development board.
Yes, there was a very clear moment when it began, which was at a Dovecote Studios event when I met Peter Tierfeld, who's hosting this, and we were moaning. We were both at that time trustees of Edinburgh World Heritage, and we'd just seen plans of the proposed hotel, and we'd been to the public meeting, which was organised by the AHSS, and we were moaning about the fact that surely there must be a better use. And my day-to-day work is with the finding new uses for listed buildings. And Peter mentioned the fact that he was raising money for St Mary's Music School to build a new concert hall. And it really only took about one gin and tonic before we'd come to the pretty obvious answer. And what was even better was Carol Grigger was in the room as well. And so Peter said, I know just the woman we need to talk to because she's particularly passionate about this. And we wandered over. 10 yards later, we had the initial funding to start the project. Of course, we didn't have the school's agreement at the time, but we were in a bit of a hurry. So I phoned up Ken Taylor the next day, and Ken said, yeah, sure, sounds interesting, come and see me. And within 24 hours, we had a project. And I mean, I think what's fascinating about it is all of the individuals, all of us who were involved in this from the outset and who set up the trust, and a huge number of Edinburgh citizens have an extraordinarily strong part of their heart for this building. And I think there's always been a sense that it's an underused gem. And I was always aware of it. I was an Edinburgh Academy boy, and the Academy, obviously the high school, was set up as a reaction to the Edinburgh Academy, which was a sort of privatisation of education. And I had a great friend who lived in Regent Terrace, and I used to go and see him, and I used to walk past the high school, and I used to think, damn, that's a hell of a lot more handsome building than the Academy. I probably shouldn't be saying this. But even as a 14-year-old schoolboy, it was just obvious what an extraordinary building it is. And I think because of that, you know, that was my very sort of untutored reaction. This incredible romantic Arcadian building sitting on a hillside in the middle of a beautiful neoclassical city. I mean, really, we're surrounded by monuments. I mean, you know, what a dream place. And it still retained that sense of its dream quality, despite the fact that it's been underused for so long. So really, we found it very easy to harness a great deal of enthusiasm for finding a use which was consistent with the building. And, you know, it's the first thing I think any conservator would tell, anyone involved in conservation would say to you, that far the most straightforward use for a building is the use it was originally designed for. So, you know, that was the genesis of the idea, and we were incredibly lucky, and we took on, you know, we formed the trust very quickly by April 2015. We did an initial study of what might be possible to fit into it. We then took the move of taking on Richard Murphy as the architect, and you know, Richard has a very sidelong, interesting view of how historic spaces can be used. And his insight was absolutely brilliant. I don't know if it's probably the time to maybe sort of look at some of the images that
I know, Muir, you have some good images of not only what the building as it is and as it was planned. What do we know of Thomas Hamilton's design brief for the school? And you know, because we see it, obviously we see it from the outside. But what do we know of what he was asked to bring to the building from a functionality point of view?
Well, it was to move the school from its old premises on Infirmary Street, which are now part of the university. It was to expand it, but also I think the critical thing was to give the school a sort of moral presence in the city. And I think it's very difficult to understate actually what a strong reaction politically in the early 1820s there was to the sort of the splitting of the city. Edinburgh had always been in the old town, you know, the rich lived on top of the poor and everyone was kind of hugger-mugger together, and that was part of the essential character of Edinburgh. And it suddenly started becoming rather more genteel with the posh folks heading out to the new town in the north, and they were not going to allow their children to see the sort of scruffy ones in the old town. So they moved the Edinburgh Academy out to the north of the north. So they were, you know, there was the chances for people to mix were hugely reduced. And I think there was a sort of strong reaction to that. And so they chose this absolutely central place in the city where the old town and the new town, remembering that the new town was always envisaged to move east, was met. And you know, it was one of the most important places that you could build in Edinburgh. And the council chose to put a school there, and not, you know, and not a school for just for the rich people, but a school for the talented people. And I think that's, you know, you only need to look at this picture and see, goodness me, I mean, this isn't just a functional building, this is a sculpture.
Yeah. Now, what about now that was designed to be a school then? How far does a building that was designed to be fit for purpose then work as a school for the 21st century?
Well, funny you should mention that. Well, this is a cross section of the school here, and I think the first thing you have to note about it is that the previous image looks like it's a massive sculpture. It's a massive piece of masonry, which is designed to have an extraordinary presence, even when viewed from as far away as Arthurseat. So but you look inside it, and it's one room deep for the most part, and it's you know, a lot of the architectural presence of it is made up of screen walls, which are merely holding back earth behind it. So it was really quite a small building, and it was also a building which, you know, I think maybe Hamilton concentrated rather more on his moral purpose than he did on the practicalities of education. There was the school had 4 houses, and each house came in through a different entrance. And the idea was that they each come in. So, Peter, if we could go back to the previous slide, maybe. Yeah, each house came into through a different entrance into the central hall, and this was the sort of great, you know, Grecian debating chamber where debate would go on, and, you know, futures would be made. And then, having been educated in this cauldron in the center of this moral device, you then, I think, if we can go back to the first slide, just one back, you then come out under the portico onto this extraordinary platform where you had a view of Edinburgh with its romantic, enlightened landscape behind it. And the only time you were allowed out of that door was once you graduated. So it was a sense of this building as a machine which you moved through. Now, the unfortunate thing was it was actually very difficult to move through. So the 2 little pylon gateways you can see on Regent Road at the front there lead through a sort of Indiana Jones-like series of passageways up to the hall. So the poor old houses which had to go up through that had a terrible sort of damp, slippy, sort of rather unpleasant half inside, half outside route in, whereas the people who came in through the north had a rather easy route straight into the back. So that was very quickly abandoned. It just wasn't practical. And that has been what has really benighted the building ever since, because I think if we go on to the cross-section slide, so next one, yeah, there, you can, well, if one, yeah, no, that's fine. Let's stay with that. You can see the man on the left-hand side looking up at the school is at Regent Road level. So he's at the natural apparent entrance to the school, whereas the place he's got to get to do anything, or she's got to get to do anything, is the Great Hall, which is behind the portico. So, and there was no natural link to achieve that. So you ended up with a building which was almost impossible to access from Regent Road. And the other problem with the building, as we saw in the plan, was it's only one room deep, and any sort of, so to go between any of the rooms, unless you were going from room to room, you had to go outside, which again, simply isn't practical. It probably wasn't terribly practical in 1825, and it certainly isn't practical now. And what Richard Murphy's great insight was that what the building needed, was a foyer, so a space where you could gather before you went into the performance space or the debating chamber. And secondly, it needed a much more natural route through it. And what Richard provided was this new, effectively, foyer underneath the entrance hall. That's perfect. And what this means is that it acts really like a traditional theatre, where you come in at the ground floor level, you go into a foyer, you gather, you get your ticket, you get your drink, you leave your coat behind, and then you find your way up to the debating chamber or the performance space. So if we move on to the next slide, there you can see, I mean, that looks quite like a normal theatre. Now, there's been a fair amount of comment about, oh, well, isn't this removing a huge amount of rock? But of course, the thing is, because of the cross section, and if we go back 2 or 3 slides here, or even one more than that, you can see the slope of the ground. That's perfect. You can see the slope of the ground actually means that there's the brown piers you can see, which used to be the boiler room, actually are most of the space where the foyer would go. Now, it's not to say it's not a complicated engineering process, of course it is, but it's certainly, you know, if similar things have been done at the Royal Scottish Museum and at the National Galleries, so it's and by the same engineering team, so it's certainly possible to do. And the other thing is, if we go forward one from here, that's absolutely critical is the new entrance into the foyer is not visible from Regent Road. So the person with the red arrow showing their eye line is looking at the top of the new doorway, and that is screened by the screen walls which run between the 2 pylon doorways which form the original entrances and which will become the new entrances. So we've ended up with something that actually produces a really wonderful, practical, small concert space. And if we move on to 2 slides along from this, yeah, this one, you can see it's not just one performance space, it's also the 2 large, rather splendid octagonal rooms on either side, which can be accessed by the new stairways, which sit in between them in areas which are currently corridors. So suddenly this very difficult building, which didn't really have a natural entrance, had this enormously sort of architectural frontage, which actually didn't work as a frontage, suddenly becomes something that'll be rather a marvelous adventure. And we can actually all play the Indiana Jones, sort of working our way through this building up to what will hopefully be amazing performances over the years.
Thank you. I think we're hoping to go into the design engineering of it in greater detail in a further session with Richard. I wonder if I could bring you back though to the issue of it. You've illustrated very much how it will work as a public building, but clearly it's also got to function as a school, and as it was designed. There is a bit of a tension there between a public building and the private safe space for school, and I wondered how that had been addressed.
Yeah, well, that was the absolute critical thing. Is actually we've ended up effectively with two entrances. So the school continues to enter from the back, as it always has, and separated, but the concert hall and potentially the two performance spaces on either side are entered from Regent Road, and they can be effectively locked down completely, so that the concert space can act entirely separately from the operations of the school. Because you're quite right that the original building is not really terribly suitable for day-to-day teaching, particularly as for music teaching, which involves a lot of practice spaces and increasingly a lot of IT. And I think that's something that we want this to be absolutely state of the art. Which is why Richard designed the other element, which is the very low-lying replacement to the existing gymnasium building and lunch hall. And I think, whilst it's not a terribly good quality camera I've got on my screen, you can see here, you can probably see behind me, you won't have even noticed what this school is, what this element of the school is, because this is the section through the eastern playground. The section is lower than the existing buildings that are there, which are a mishmash of Victorian and Edwardian buildings with no particular, I mean, they're handsome, but they're no particular merit, and they've been thoroughly altered. The replacement here provides for very contemporary teaching spaces with residential accommodation on a single story at the left-hand side of this, working around two little courtyards, so producing wonderful sort of inward-looking space, which is almost completely hidden from outside. And then behind it, rising up the hill, some very light and airy classroom spaces, which in typical Richard fashion are very cleverly lit through clear story lights, which again, makes them virtually invisible from outside the site. And with the use of green roofs, even from above, looking down from Carlton Hill, these will be incredibly discreet, relatively straightforward to construct because they're not tall structures, very little digging to do because it's using the natural contours of the ground, and virtually invisible from outside. So it was a very, very clever answer to produce a small school, which also works as a concert space. And we've got to remember, this is leaving the whole of the Western Playground, the current Western Playground, which is currently a car park, as a garden, and as a garden which can be publicly accessible. So that's really the sort of third element of what we're looking to do.
Yeah. I wonder if I could bring Carol back in at this point before we do open it out further. How will the development board and your own friends and neighbours be involved in the development in the building as it goes forward? How do you see perfect harmony becoming part of the plan?
I think moving from here, and hopefully very positively come the autumn, we will be looking to build on that fantastic philanthropic gift from Carol for the start of this project and the build of this project. But we can't leave it there. I mean, the school will be functioning as it has been financially in that way, but we're needing to make use of these three beautiful spaces. And that's always been the point, that these would be open to the public, that they're for public benefit. So we'll be looking to fundraise from in a small way to the larger donations. So we'll be chasing that. And we'll be also looking for people to come into the building and help volunteer in a sense, sort of a docent sort of way, to give tours to people, to help people move around. So, I mean, I think it'll be a very sort of interactive way, and slowly building that campaign as well, in a sense, through the fundraising. We're hoping it is sort of active in the way that crowdfunding can be so active that people start to feel they've got a share in an activity. So, you know, we're hoping to build on that, so that from the start, before it's even the new school is coming up out the ground and the development of the old school, people will be buying into the whole project with us, and it's real, and it wakes everybody up to what's happening as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. What about other partners besides yourselves? How far will the City Council be involved in the proposal, in the plans going forward?
Well, will they be able to help on this as well? But we really do hope that as it develops, I mean, obviously, initially, that's what we will be doing. What will have to come in is a management organizational structure at the top, because we can't expect the school to be managing all of that as well. You know, this is a music centre now, mm-hmm. And hopefully the National Music Centre. So we will need a management structure. And I think that the idea has always been that there will be some sort of trust and board which everybody can be a part of, including the council, which is always the best way to go. You want to be communicating with the council, you want to be moving in the same direction as, you know, in the city, and particularly in the cultural life of the city. The pandemic has not in any way helped the cultural life of anywhere. And it's been hugely affecting Edinburgh with the festival and all the rest of it. But there's still some exciting things happening. You know, we've got the Royal High School all going well. We've got Impact Centre all going well. We've got the new film house all going well. We've sort of got this crescent of culture to help renew the sort of cultural life and vibrancy of Edinburgh. So I think it's very much slow, steady, brick by brick, to something magnificent ahead. You know, so we're hoping to be very involved with all the organisations that we can be.
Does that include the Scottish Government, relatively near neighbours of the building, and well, the Scottish office certainly across the road?
Well, we're very pleased that the Scottish Government agreed with the reporters and disallowed the hotel proposals. So as far as we're aware, they're very keen on the project. So I would like to think perhaps there was some Scottish Government funding coming our way, one way or another. Yeah. Arts Council or whatever.
Willie, have you got anything to add to that?
No. I think the important thing to realise is that the trust will have three roles in its life, and we're really coming to the end of our first role, which was about campaigning for a different future for the building. And clearly, there's going to be an important a period when the building is put out to competition, but you know we're confident we can come through that and show the best answer. We'll then be in a period when we are developing the building for the new National Music School and the associated other uses, and then the final phase, I think, really is the public one, when we become custodian of the building, and that's the point at which the trust becomes rather different from what it is now, because it'll be overseeing the National Music School as tenant. The trust has no desire or knowledge of how to run a music school, but what it does want to do is preserve the building for public benefit. So in the lease that we would give to the National Music School, there would be conditions about continued public access, maintenance of the buildings, and the range of outreach that were there, which I think will be willingly signed up to, clearly. But that means that our role has really become supervisory, and that's when you can imagine local councillors becoming trustees. You can imagine representation from the key civic bodies in the city, and so it's this gradual sort of standing back from the thing and saying, right, the building is now safe. The building now has a suitable use, and it has a public use, and that's critical to our plans.
That all seems fairly clear. Question to you both, though: what is the timeline for this now? where are we in the process, and how would you like to see things proceeding?
If I could answer in terms of the timing, we expect an invitation for tenders to come out from the council probably in early April. Whilst we understand that the council has terminated the contract with the hotel operator, the absolute drop dead for a date for it was the end of March. So we expect a competition in early April. We think that's a very good idea. It's very important that this debate goes on publicly about what the best use, and there's no behind the scenes deals about this. So we want to do that. So that will probably come to a decision probably in the third quarter of this year. Thereafter, there's still a lot of planning through to the construction phase for the building, finalizing business plans, etc. But I think, in the best of worlds, perhaps the building could be operational in 2024, 2025. That's the sort of timescale. I mean, it's a very complicated project, but we've got a fantastic start with the work that's happened today.
Mm-hmm. Carol, with anything to add to that?
I think that would be great. That gives us a little bit of time to raise the money pot, which would be good. And it'll be unbelievable. I can't tell you how exciting this all is. We've lived with this empty building for decades, beautiful though it is, and to think it's going to come back to life again in really a comparatively short time is fantastic. It's such an exciting project. And from the point of view of the building, for those of us who are near it and love it and see it so often, we were going to be left with, if the hotel had won, two huge blocks at both sides of this building. And now we'll hardly see anything on the east. The west will be a garden, and the building will still be there for us all to savor as we have. Let's hope 2024, 25 would be fantastic.
You paint a lovely picture, Carol. Perhaps at this point, Peter, you could introduce us to some of the questions that you've had.
Yes, what I'll do, Keith, is I'll read out a couple of the questions, and perhaps you can then take them on board. One of the questions has to do with access around the building and how that will function. You've showed us lots of steps, but we'd like to know how everyone will be able to move around the building. There's also a question here, has the building been purchased? And there's also a question here about the overall cost of the project, and what will the money be raised, what money needs to be raised. And I'll just interject that the school has a fit out that needs to be raised, which is going to be very important. So those are just a handful of the questions.
Perhaps we could deal first with the purchase question, and move on from there. Where are we with that?
I think it's very clear that this is the council regards this as one of their key assets, and I don't think they would want to sell it. They are, it is one of the great glories of the council that they originally chose to build this. So I think what they've always envisaged is a long lease, and a long lease means something like 125 years, which is a virtual freehold. So that was the basis of the hotel scheme. As I mentioned, the council are likely to launch a competition or a tendering process in early April, in which they'll ask for people to offer for it. And what they've assured us is that the decision won't be made on whoever offers the most money to take up for the lease. And to put it in context, the hotel operator, I think, offered $1.25 million. It was something like that for the lease. It won't be on the basis of who pays the most money. It's what will provide the greatest long-term benefit to the city. And I think that's a very, very dramatic change from how it was being talked about in the last competition in 2009.
Are you able to see what finance is already in place? What you mentioned the Dunard Fund, for instance.
Well, and Dunard Fund have very generously sponsored us to date, and they've made a commitment of 35 million, which I think this answers one of the other questions. That's the budgeted cost for the construction works, of which broadly about 25 million is for the building itself, is the restoration of the existing building, and a further 10 million for the construction of the new school facilities to the east. Obviously, on top of that, and this is something maybe Carol will talk about, there's fundraising for the school and for its endowment.
Yeah. Do you have a specific target, Carol?
It's a big one. It needs to be a big one. We're not thinking small, put it that way. But we don't actually yet have a target. But I have every faith that with the well of support that we have in the city, for every reason, the musical reason, the school, saving the building, heritage generally, and the cultural life, there is such support. And beyond the city, I'm sure lots of people know how you raise money. You have to look at, there's trusts and endowments all over the place you have to apply to, and that is a separate business. But really, we're wanting to engage with the public in Edinburgh and in Scotland and the diaspora, all of it. So, every penny counts.
Yeah. The other thing that Peter mentioned there from the early questions was access. I mean, the public facing side of it on Regent Road, will that be open to promoters to hire to use for concerts, or will the provision emanate from the work of the school?
I don't think we want to be too prescriptive about that, because I don't think we want to. I think what we're, the sure way to kill creativity, I imagine, is to be prescriptive about it 5 years before you're going to have an event. What we're going to produce is a concert hall which is acoustically excellent, which is relatively small scale. I mean, this isn't going to compete with the Impact Centre at all. It's maximum 300 seats. It will have a particular character to it, and I think what we all hope is that it'll find suitable creative occupiers, throughout the year, and will develop its own character and its own base of both audience and performers. And of course, the great thing about the school is that it vacates the whole complex during the key cultural period for the city during the summer. So the opportunity to have a range of very different events, the obvious thing is you could imagine a visiting youth orchestra or some kind of artistic conference. You could imagine a series of debates going on. I mean, it could be used in any number of ways at the time when the city is under most pressure from visitors. So we think this is a tremendous thing. And I do say one thing I would like to add to this is we've talked about the opportunity of the school, we've talked about the opportunity of the garden, we've talked about the opportunity of the concert hall, but the other great opportunity anyone who's ever gone down Regent Road knows is Regent Road itself, which was designed as a 1960s dual carriageway and really should be one of the great sort of plaza spaces of Edinburgh, which has the most extraordinary view. It's not heavily trafficked at all. And frankly, at the moment, it's used as a bus park. So there is the other thing that we'd really, really like to work with the council and the Scottish Government on.
In the context of George Street being revisited once again, it's an interesting point. Yeah. Well, any other questions, Peter?
I think we have time for, there's quite a number of questions, but we have time for one more. This question has to do with collaboration with Impact. Might there be opportunities to work more closely with them in terms of programming, rehearsal space, and educational outreach. And can I say we've already had someone who wants to make a provisional booking in 2025.
Just for the benefit of anybody watching who doesn't know, Impact, of course, is the plan for a new concert hall for primarily for the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, which Dunard Fund is also involved in at St Andrews Square. So yes.
I mean, I think there's huge synergy, obviously, not just because of the geographical proximity, also because you know, there's quite a lot of common interest in it, but there's also very strong existing partnership between the SCO and the school anyway. So you can imagine the Impact Centre becoming sort of a booking mechanism for the concert hall. You can imagine sort of programs which are conjoined, which produce a range of linked events between the two spaces. You can imagine SEO masterclasses in the smaller space that the school will provide. There's just, you know, there's a huge number of potential streams of collaboration, provided that we produce a space which is accessible, which is acoustically excellent, and which is attractive, which is exciting to go to. And I don't think we should underestimate the sheer excitement of this building as it was conceived by Hamilton and as we can realize it as a journey.
Thank you very much to you both for presenting a very clear proposal, and at this time in particular, when we're all gagging to get back to a live music concert and mix with other people and see music performed live. It's tremendously encouraging to be talking about plans that will enable more of us to do that in more spaces in the years to come. Thank you very much to Carol and to Willie for joining us, and thank you all for tuning into the first of these cultural conversations. And we'll look forward to myself and my colleague hosting more of these over the summer. Please look to the St Mary's website and the Perfect Harmony website to keep up to date and find out about them.
Thank you very much.